I'm going to introduce Luke McKenzie, who's leading this presentation today. Luke McKenzie is the director of Mineral County Emergency Services, and he's also the treasurer of the chamber. So, and Luke wears many other hats as well. I don't know how he juggles it all. Plus, he's got 3 kids, so he's a busy guy. But we're very grateful to have him here today to talk about a really important topic that we've never talked about before. So, without any further ado, Luke McKenzie.
All right, and Randy, you did say you're recording this?
Yes.
Okay, well then I will speak like everyone here doesn't know me. So today's presentation is going to be about plan to stay in business. We're going to have a couple of focuses and I'll go over those objectives, but mostly it's going to be about keeping your people safe. And then even on top of that, we're more so going to talk about the continuity of operations and keeping your actual business alive after a disaster. So real quick, like Randy said, my name is Luke McKenzie. I am the Director of Emergency Services for the Mineral County Commission, and I've been in my position since 2016. I am from Kaiser. I was born and raised here and have always been here. I hold a Master of Business Administration, and I'm also a Certified Emergency Manager through the International Academy of Emergency Managers, and I'm also a Certified Emergency Manager Level 2 through the West Virginia Emergency Management Council. Some of my main responsibilities with the County Commission is I'm responsible for all the emergency operations planning and for the county's continuity of operations planning, as well as many, many other things through emergency management, 911, and mapping and addressing. I do have training and certificates in continuity of operations, as well as many other facets of disaster preparedness, response, and recovery. So today's course objectives, number 1, we're going to review the various types of disasters and the effects they have on business. And the reason we're going to go over that is just because I know a lot of people think disaster preparedness. When you think of disaster, you think of a hurricane or something along those lines. But really, for a business, a disaster could be death of a key employee. It could be a small flood on one floor of your business. It could be a lot of things. So we're going to talk about that. Objective 2 will be to discuss the planning needed to keep your people safe. Then objective 3 is going to be our largest, and it's it's really the meat and potatoes of what today is about. We're going to discuss the internal programmatic planning that should occur to keep your business safe. And then finally, I'll give you a couple of resources that are available to businesses at no cost before, during, and after a disaster. So like I said, the first objective, we're just going to review the various types of disasters and how they affect the business. So what is a disaster? So a disaster is a sudden event such as an accident or natural catastrophe that causes great damage or loss of life. So like I said, so many people think that a disaster is a hurricane or a flood, and it is, but in a business, it could be a fire at a warehouse. It could be anything that causes great damage to your business, not just physically, but financially or in your operations. So here's some types of disasters for business. Hurricane and flooding. You obviously know what types of effects that would have on your business. It's going to be physical damage to your storefront. It's going to be issues with your workforce being able to get to work. It's going to be operations and supply chain issues with getting the things you need if you are an actual vendor-based business that you sell physical items. Power loss and blackouts. A lot of people don't think of power loss as a disaster, but if you're a restaurant or a data center or a 911 center, a power loss is a disaster. It's especially a long-term one. It's something that requires a lot of planning. Again, another thing people don't think of as a disaster is death of a key employee. There are so many businesses that if one person would pass, the entire business may have to fold up. I worked at my grandma's business for 5 years. The whole time I was in high school and part of the time I was in college, she used to own Kaiser Decorating in Kaiser. And if something would have ever happened to her, it's almost a guarantee that that business would have folded up because no one else knew it inside and out like she did. And that's unfortunately not a good way to be able to continue your business if something does happen, because if that business is a primary source of income for a family, that's a really scary thought. If one person dies, the family could become broke. fire, and then just any kind of significant physical damage to a facility. I mean, if a pipe bursts on in your business and your business floods, that is a disaster. Um, a really scary stat, and not try to scare you, but according to the Small Business Administration, 25%, 25%, a quarter of businesses never reopen after a disaster. So objective 2, here we're going to discuss the planning that's needed to keep your people safe. So we're going to talk about the actual things you need to do to make sure your people are safe during a disaster. Because if you don't have people, you don't have a business. This one is going to be shorter than objective 3, but we're still going to discuss it. There's some really obvious things you can do, but maybe you don't think about it. You can build an emergency kit for your business, plus have each person build a kit to sustain individualized needs. So that just seems very simple, and honestly, it seems kind of silly because I'm never going to stay at my business. But the fact of the matter is, we do have shelter-in-place types of emergencies with chemicals, there's a lot of things where your business, the people might have to stay there. So build an emergency kit for your business and make sure each person has a small kit of their own that can sustain their individualized needs. Have a pre-designed communications plan so that employees know what is going on before, during, and after a disaster. That's something we're going to talk about a little more in depth on objective 3, having a crisis communications plan, because that is so important internally and externally, so people know what's going on with your business. Have an evacuation plan in place for your employees and for your customers. So having an evacuation plan, if no one knows where they're supposed to go to, is totally worthless. So make sure you have this plan in place and then communicate it to everyone. Make sure exits are marked, plans are posted, exits are posted, and have an accountability system in place. If you're a business that has 2 employees, it's not hard to know that, yes, my employees made it out. But if you have 100 employees and you need to evacuate, how will you know who has made it out and who still may be inside? So have an evacuation plan in place for your employees and for your customers. And then have a shelter in place plan. And this kind of goes back to your emergency kit. Some of the things in there that you might not think about, but you really may need, especially if you're in a densely populated area with a lot of other buildings and things, is dust or filter masks, a wrench or pliers to turn off utilities. That would be a terrible thing to be in a situation where you're sheltering in place in your business and you have a gas leak and you can't shut off your main. Or the same thing with water. Even if you just have one pipe bust, you want to be able to shut off your main quickly rather than scrambling around to find a wrench or a pair of pliers. So keep something like that nearby, and that will, it seems small, but that could really bring down the amount of physical damage done to your business. And then finally, the most important thing for all of this is review and update plans at least annually. So many places create a plan, and I know some very large organizations that have people dedicated to this kind of thing that have a plan, but it sits on the shelf and no one knows what it says. Having a plan is completely worthless if you don't know what it says and if it's not up to date. So we'll get into that a little bit more. So then here is the majority of what this presentation is going to be about. Discussing the internal programmatic planning that should occur to keep your business safe. This is the stuff, it's not about physically preparing to keep your people safe. This is about, how am I going to continue? How is my business going to remain viable after a disaster? And that's what this today is really about. Keeping your people safe should always be your #1 priority. But again, this is for the Chamber of Commerce, so this is really what today is going to be about. Continuity planning. So first off, what is it? It's such an important piece of business survival after an event. And what it is it's planning to ensure that when an event occurs, the organization is able to continue essential functions. Now notice the essential is bolded and underlined. The idea of a continuity plan, or a COOP, a continuity of operations plan, is not to keep your business doing all of the things it's always done forever. The idea of a coop is for your business to be able to operate and perform at the bare minimum until you can get back to normal operations. This is doing all of the things that you have to do to stay in business. This is all about ensuring the resiliency of an organization's essential functions. So we'll talk about that, but many people have probably already done this year because of minimal staffing with COVID. But you simply have to determine what you have to have to keep operating. So here's some steps to continuity planning. Number one, you need to assess how your company or organization functions internally and externally. So in most cases, this is something that you already know and you have a solid grasp on, especially if it's your own company. But you really need to take a look at what you're doing internally and externally to have an idea of what needs to keep going. Number two, and this goes back to what I was just saying, determine which staff, materials, procedures, and equipment are absolutely necessary to keep the business operating. This step is probably the most important step. It's really important that we don't overvalue any services within our organization or business. The fact of the matter is that it's really hard to plan and operate in this type of event. You need to have a true determination of what you must have to keep doing what you do. Determining too many things as essential could honestly lead to potential failure. The less things you have to keep going, like your payroll and your billing, if you can keep two things going rather than trying to keep four things because one's not truly essential, you're much more likely to succeed. If you have a business flow chart, which I'm sure most people don't, but if you did, if that's something you had to do for your small business loan or something along those lines, review that chart to determine what parts of the chart are necessary to remain active and in business. This is one of those things that's really hard to approach. And the reason we're not getting too deep into where you should start is because every business is so much different. So an example would be an insurance company. To continue operating as an insurance company, you have to continue billing your clients and you have to continue paying your bills. Those are two things that you have to continue doing. But you may have to cut out new sales because you don't have the ability to continue doing those things until you can get back to normal operations. But those two items are something you can't stop doing or you have no operation. So that's something you have to think about. Is the idea of a coop is not to make more money. It is to keep you going at the bare minimum until you can get back to your normal operations. The idea is to keep your head above water until operations can be resumed. And unfortunately, it doesn't matter how excellent of a planner you are. Unless you have a very unique business or a very unique approach that many people don't know about, it is almost impossible to keep your entire business going after a disaster. Now, you can have a relatively quick recovery and get back to normal operations relatively quick, but in that interim, no matter what the event is, it does take some time. It's important just to keep the essential things happening. And then finally, in a small business, it's really important to establish a succession of management. And I say in a small business because, like I said, with my grandma's company, if something would have happened to her, the business probably would have just folded up. And in a bigger business, this is really important. Sometimes that means that someone will have to let go of a little bit of control, or you're going to have to make decisions you don't want to, but a succession of management is so important. And it's possibly one of the most important parts of this entire process. Decision-making power needs to be clearly outlined, and a next in line person, preferably more than one next in line person, should be identified for key leadership positions. So in an organization like mine, we have a director and a deputy director, and this is what we do. So we know that succession of management. We still have it written in a plan, but we know what happens. But for other organizations, I know this could be much more challenging, but it's still needed and it's something you have to take care of. Think about with COVID, and I hope this doesn't hit home with anyone, but if the business owner would become ill and put on a ventilator suddenly, who is supposed to take over and keep things going until you recover? And at that point, you wouldn't have had time to tell someone you're in charge now. Even if you're a business with 5 employees, that's going to cause some serious issues while you're down and out. So seriously think about a succession of management. I mean, in a year of pandemic, this year has been a prime example of why succession of management is so important. So that's something that really to try to have identified ahead of time, have in writing. So if something does happen, you know that you can trust this person and they know the majority of what you do and they can take over from day one until you can get back to it. Another important piece of all of this is using the whole community approach. So in emergency management, a whole community approach means all of the stakeholders. So for my organization, every year we do a threats, hazard identification, risk assessment that we have to turn into the state emergency management division, and then they turn into FEMA. But every year we have a fire and EMS meeting, we have a law enforcement meeting, we have a local emergency management planning council meeting, and then we have a community meeting that's open to everybody. And then we also discuss it with our government department heads, the people we report to, which is our commission. You need to do the same thing in your plan, not to that scale, but you need to use a whole community approach when you're planning. So establish a group within your business to work together on the plan. Because even if it's your company, if it's a decent size, you may not know every single aspect of the company, but there are people within your organization that know the details, that know how this should be done or how that would be done, and they may have really good ideas on how to continue this if something would happen. And they're also going to have additional expertise to help you determine what portions of your business are actually essential. So it's really important not to just sit at your desk and scribble all this out on your own. Now, if you want to do the first draft on your own and then review it with the committee, that would be effective. But it's really important that all of these things are shared with everyone in your business and that people have a say so that there's buy-in from everyone and that you know that your plan is truly efficient and effective, because a plan that hasn't been tested may not work. The details. Identify your key customers and plan ways to serve them during and after a disaster. So once you have completed the basics of forming a committee, determining your essential functions, and coming up with a line of succession, these are some of the details you have to think about. So identifying your key customers. And again, this is a really hard one. If you're a retail-based store, it's going to be hard to determine what customers you want to serve. However, if you're a law firm, this is simple. You're going to serve the customers that bring in the largest amount of revenue, because those are the people who are ultimately paying your bills. You might not be able to take on new clients during a COOP activation, but after, you can go back to normal. But identify your key customers and plan ways to serve them during and after a disaster. Think about things such as your suppliers. Try to always have a relationship open with 2 or more suppliers. If one supplier becomes unable to deliver product, that could be devastating to your business. And again, there's probably some of you on this call that know more about that than I do, because this year there have been a lot of suppliers that have had to go down to half production, half staffing, and they're not able to deliver what they were able to deliver previously. So keeping a relationship open with 2 or more suppliers really will help you in that case to try to get what you need. Because again, at a retail location, if you can't get the product that you're selling, you have no business. And then alternative locations. So this goes back to retail versus law firm, those types of things. But talk about an alternative location for your business. Know where your business could go, where you continue to operate if something happened. So for example, the courthouse's plan, we have a memorandum of understanding in place with the Kaiser Fire Department. If something were to ever happen to the courthouse, we would then move our operations, the courthouse's operations, to Kaiser Fire Department 2. That doesn't mean that the courthouse is going to be doing all of the things they do, but they would be doing the things they have to do from that location. For so many businesses, though, you can just simply have alternative work arrangements. If you don't interface with the public a whole lot, or even if it's very limited interface with the public, just have alternative work arrangements. Have items in place so that your employees can work remotely and from other locations if they need to. And this is as simple as having programs like Log Me In on all of your computers, having backup hard drives of things, all of those things. It's as simple as that, just so people can have a connection to what they need to work remotely. Again, this cannot just be another plan. Continuity of operations must be part of a bigger picture. Your COOP is simply part of your continuity program. It's not the end all be all. In order for this to truly be effective, you have to know the plan inside and out. You have to look at it. You have to update it. Your employees have to have a very basic understanding of it. You have to exercise it, share it, and again, review and make updates. An exercise doesn't have to be something complicated. It could be 15 minutes after work, bringing all your employees together and saying, okay, if this happened right now, what would we do? And reviewing the plan with them and talking about what works and what doesn't work. But you have to do that to truly be effective and to be able to keep your business thriving after a disaster. You have to know your continuity of operations plan. You have to be able to stay in business and keep doing what you do and be familiar with it. The updates, it seems like, well, I did this, so it's good. Just simply think about your succession of management. Some employers don't have a whole lot of turnover, but for the most part, in our current conditions, most employers do have a lot of turnover. People switch jobs frequently, even if it's only every 5 or 10 years. The turnover is more than that, but people switch jobs. If you're next in line on your succession of management is someone that left a year ago, then the succession of management is doing you no good. So you have to keep those things up to date. Some other considerations to take into account for continued operations. And this one, again, is just like at your house. Have emergency documents in a place that are easily accessible, in some place that you're able to take them with you, preferably in like a fireproof mobile container. And you might be thinking, well, I keep all of that stuff in a safe deposit box anyways. But think about this. Consider documents such as employee contact information. If you lost your computer, do you have phone numbers for all of your employees? Bank account information. Do you have all of your account numbers and all of the things you need to access that remotely? Supplier and vendor information. That's a really important one. I know so many businesses now rely on their computers to do all of their supplier and vendor interface. They email or they use portals through that vendor to do all of their ordering. If your main computer is damaged in your facility, do you have that information somewhere else so you can access that from another computer? Because so frequently we favorite something, we put it in our bookmarks bar, and that's the last we think of it. We don't even remember what the name of the website is. Well, for this, it's important for you to keep that information somewhere, even if it's a paper list of the website that you go to order items. That's better than having nothing at all. And then any other important documents, and that might be your articles of incorporation or anything like that. But there's a good chance you don't keep those on site anyways. Then off-site computer backups. There are so many businesses, and this is the world we're in, and this is my business as well, my organization. Our computers are our business. They hold everything that we need to know. So be sure that your computers are backed up and backed up in a location that if something would happen to your physical facility, they are accessible. And in 2021, it's so simple to do this. A very classic way of doing that is literally to have 2 external hard drives. They're relatively cheap. You could get 2 external hard drives for less than $100 very easily. Every day you bring it in, or even once a week, you bring it in and you plug it into your computer, you back your stuff up, and you take it home. Then the next day you bring the other one in and you do the same thing. That way you have a constant backup off site of your computer. So if something happens to your physical facility, you still have access. And then there's cloud-based backup. If you're a person who really, the majority of your computing is just simply files, Word, Excel spreadsheets, those types of things, cloud-based backup is so affordable. I pay $1.99 a month and I literally use Apple's iCloud. And everything I do on my computer is automatically uploaded to the cloud and I can access it from anywhere. Um, there are also professional companies that literally specialize in backing up your computer on a cloud-based system. So just consider those types of things, because if your computer fails, do you know how to proceed forward with your business? Now, this is what I said we'd get back to: crisis communications planning. So this is internal and external communications. And both of those types of communications are so important for a successful recovery after a disaster. And you might say, why are my external communications important? Internal has an obvious importance because your people who work for you, who work for your business, the people that are your business, have to have an understanding of when they're to return to work, what they're supposed to be doing, all of those types of things. So internal communications, relatively simple. External communications, why is that important? Well, the reason it's important is because your company, your external stakeholders, your customers need to know what's going on. If you're relying on these people for all of your revenue, they need to know when you're open. They need to know when you're closed. You need to make sure they're able to have access to what's going on. If your business, if something as simple as your business hours change, you're operating on a more limited schedule, let's say 6 hours a day, but you have a customer that usually comes in at 9 a.m. and you're not open till 11, that's not a good way to keep a long-term customer if they're coming and your business is closed, and there's no way for them to know that. Your crisis communication plan can be as complex or as simple as you want it to be. It can be as simple as a phone tree, a Facebook message group, your business's Facebook page. It can be any of those things, but you need to have a plan in place prior to something happening. So think about those things. This isn't something that even has to cost you money. This is something that can be completely free. Like I said, Facebook Messenger, a group text message, a group email, a Facebook group. There's so many things you could do to make sure you can communicate with all of your key stakeholders internally and externally. This is not something that is just for big business. This is for all businesses. Even if you only have one employee, it's important that that employee knows what's going on. Having a solid crisis communications plan will keep your internal and external stakeholders informed. And again, simple or as complex as you want it to be. It can even be a phone tree if you're not an overly technical person. So any of those things will work. We worked with one organization. We worked with Potomac State. They're revamping their crisis communications plan and they're doing an excellent job at it. But because they reached out to us and we worked with them and we talked and they worked with all their stakeholders, we were all able together to come up with some really cool things. Now, mind you, they have very complex systems in place. But for example, what before needed to be an actual phone call from a human is now done by a computer. When we have an event, we can simply drag and drop what we call a station on our CAD, and it will notify all of their police officers, all of their students, and it does all of that automatically by us simply clicking one button from our 911 center. And we were able to figure that out because they exercised their plan and they worked with their stakeholders. So that is so important. And they were also able to come up with a 24 hours a day, 7 days a week conference bridge so that when something happens, their leadership team can get together very quickly. Because previously, like with most places, it was one of those things where we'll just have to meet. But now we're in COVID and it's different. We can't meet in person. So now when something happens, they all know we call this one number and everybody will be there. So think about doing things like that, especially if you're a larger business. Get with your leadership team and come up with ideas on how you can communicate during a disaster so you can make those important decisions immediately to keep your business operational and to keep your clients happy until you can get back to normal operations.
Luke, if I can interrupt for just a second, I completely agree with that, and I saw it firsthand when we had COVID this past year. Well, we're still in it. Many of our small businesses, and I'm thinking a lot of our restaurants, for example, or small retail, um, a good deal of them didn't have any way of communicating with their customers. The ones who had Facebook, you could at least put your new operating hours or whether you were closed or open, that kind of thing. And that's an easy way for people to kind of check in on a business. But we had quite a few small businesses that had no web page or no Facebook or any other social media. So how do you communicate with your folks then, your customers? And so I think it's really important that if you are a small business, that you have, some plan, and businesses are different. So there's no one size fits all, but for a restaurant, I think it's critical to have some sort of social media that people can quickly find out what's going on with your business.
Right, right. Because at the end of the day, we need to keep our customers happy so they keep coming back.
Right.
So, yes, yeah. So, crisis communications is such an important part. And even since COVID, Google allows you to put your temporary hours on their website. And that's something you can do very simply just by searching for your business. So, crisis communications is an extremely important part of continuing your operation. Now, this one is kind of a more obvious one and something you all have probably thought about. Simply reviewing your insurance coverage. If you're in a building that would cost $400,000 to rebuild and it's insured for $100,000, you might want to reconsider that. If your facility has $300,000 worth of inventory and you're insured for $100,000, you may want to reconsider that. So just review your insurance coverages and you know what you need. Prepare for utility disruptions. This one's not as obvious, but it is just as important, especially for like a restaurant. If you keep a large stockpile of food in your refrigerators and you're not prepared for utility disruption, that could cost you thousands of dollars in lost food. Any kind of energy consumption heavy business, for example, a 911 center, we are nothing without power, but we have multiple things in place that allow us to continue operating even when the power is out everywhere else. So it's really important to just consider utility disruptions. And this could be your gas, your electric, this could be your phone and internet. If your internet's down, do you have a backup plan and can your business continue to operate? And then physical security of facilities, buildings, and plants. And that's literally just door locks, those types of things, making sure your business, your investment is as safe as possible, doing what you can. And then the final one, the securing equipment, that's not talking about like a physical securing from robbery and those kinds of things. It means securing equipment these are mitigation things you would do. So for example, if your business is in the floodplain, it's prone to flooding, and you have any kind of appliances, it is a worthwhile thing to build a platform to keep those appliances on top of, especially computers and things where if you get a flood, the water will be below that item rather than on it. So that's what that means, is the securing of those items, elevating things. If you're in an earthquake prone area, which we obviously aren't, you would secure items so they don't fall off walls, those types of things. But those are mitigation efforts so that you don't have as great of a loss if something occurs. Honestly, keeping things off the floor is not a bad idea anywhere, even if you're not flood prone, because if you have a busted pipe and you only get an inch of water, that could ruin every computer that's sitting on the floor. So simply elevating things a couple inches off the floor, doing those types of things are worthwhile. And then finally, on this objective, improving cybersecurity. Unfortunately, when it comes to cybersecurity, I'm not your guy. but it is important. I do know the basics that keep your computers up to date, especially with security related patches. Do not neglect that. And do not disable firewalls and other physical security equipment that might be there for the purposes of cybersecurity. If your cybersecurity plan is lacking, it would never hurt to get professional help, especially if your business is one that heavily relies on the internet and on computers to operate. So get professional help and think about that, because all businesses are at risk of ransomware, of spyware, of all of those things. So just always keep that in mind and try to get professional help on that. There are a lot of resources available online as well, and I'm going to give you one. So the final objective is I'm simply going to give you a list of links that provide you with the resources that are available to businesses before, during, and after a disaster. So readyrating.org, I like to put a little plug in for. It's not actually a government, it's an NGO. So it's Red Cross runs that website. And it's specifically designed for businesses. I think there's some personal stuff on there as well, but it is definitely designed for businesses. And you can go on and do an assessment of your business. And it will tell you your preparedness rating. It will give you recommendations. It will give you templates on what you can do to prepare. So readyrating.org is really cool. It's definitely a reputable website. It's ran by the NGO American Red Cross. Ready.gov, that is a FEMA operated website, and they have a lot of things for everyone, for personal, for business, all of those things. But ready.gov. The SBA.gov, you could honestly just go to SBA.gov and be able to find stuff. But if you go to the SBA.gov/funding program/disaster assistance, that will take you to the programs they have available for all disasters, but for COVID as well. And then it also will give you links to get to other items to help you prepare your business. Because at the end of the day, the federal government wants you to be prepared as well, because it keeps you in business and it saves grant and loan funding. But they do have a lot of resources available on there. And then finally, for cybersecurity, us-cert.gov will give you cybersecurity tips. And I've also dropped off a couple of books and things down to the chamber for Randy, if anyone wants them. There is Every Business Should Have a Plan, which is what this class is very heavily based off of. Its materials. There are materials for emergency supply lists and your emergency financial first aid kit, and that can be personal or for business. I appreciate everyone's time. Does anyone have any questions or anything about anything I've presented today?
Thanks so much for this, Luke. It was great. Are these slides available?
I can send them to Randy and he can absolutely send them out.
That would be great.
I can either send them out or put them on our webpage, and I'm going to take a copy of this this Zoom session and put it up on our webpage as well, so people can.
I wanted to get, particularly that last slide, wanted to get that information to my COO and our quality improvement guy.
Oh, okay. Awesome. Yeah, we'll make sure. I'll get that to you, Chris. And
and I'll send it to Randy immediately after this.
And for any of our businesses out there or members, if you have IT questions or issues, or you want to figure out how to improve the systems that you already have, I kind of used to do that in my real life job. So I would be happy to work with people on issues like that if you need them or need help. And if it's something that is beyond my specialties, then I have people that I can refer you to that would help you a lot. So that's important. I mean, like Luke said, computers are so critical right now. I've got a little backup drive that I plug in every day, and this helped me recently when my laptop died to the point where it couldn't be retrieved. But I spent about an hour and restored everything I had on a brand new computer, and I was good to go. You try doing that without that, you'll spend days or weeks trying to recreate data that you lost. So yeah, it's stuff like that is really important. And it depends on the size of your business. You know, a small business or small nonprofit can get away with something like that. The larger you get, the more robust your situation needs to be. Like Luke mentioned, cloud backup, or you can have backup systems in house that are really robust and they reach out along your network. So, but anyway, I'd be happy to help with any of that if people need that. And Luke, thank
Yes,
you.
and
That was very, very thorough presentation. So great
And I'm
stuff.
happy to help anyone any way we can. I'm not a cybersecurity specialist, but this is what we do, all of us up here. So even if it's just as simple as the 911 center, because it has to operate all the time. So that is a running constant coop, because people don't really understand the number of things that happen on a day that we have to continue operations through and be adaptive. So anyone has any questions, please feel free to reach out. And Randy, I just emailed that presentation, but it doesn't look like it's going. So I'm going to have to send it via mail drop, but I will do that right now.
Okay.
Yes.
Thanks. And I'll get that out to everybody. Well, thank you again so much. Any other questions before we go? Awesome. Well, thanks again for taking the time today. And we'll put this up so other members can have access to it. So thanks again.
All right. Thank you.